The Human Language Series was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Science Foundation, the Annenberg Foundation, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, annual financial support from viewers like you, the National Institute of Mental Health, the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, and these additional funders.
This is part 3 in a series on the human language.
Language is far and away the most human characteristic there is. The one institution that we don't share in any significant way with any other organism. And that's why to study language is to study human beings.
Language and communication are really different things. We have a lot of ways of communicating that are not linguistic. It's an enormously mixed system of communication.
And we do this with our eyebrows, our eyes getting wider, with our lips.
Facial expressions,
5,
body talk,
20, 25.
communication inherited from our animal past, combined with speech into an elaborate mixed system.
Just the movement of the arm, sometimes tells you whether it's going to be a curveball or fastball. The arm have to be in this position to throw a breaking ball, have to be in this position to throw a fastball.
The question is a legitimate one of why did language evolve at all?
Without modern language, you wouldn't have human beings.
How did our species evolve the means to put it all together?
We have to assume, I think, that something so distinctive, so complex, so much at the basis of human achievement throughout the history of our species is an evolved capacity.
There is a single grammar that governs the way we are. And there is also a grammar which governs the way all of life is on Earth.
I'm glad that God didn't just love a small portion of people. I'm glad that he loved everybody, all of us, the whole world.
DNA, a kind of language, is the instrument of evolution.
So you can perhaps make the comparison between the single grammar that governs human language and the single grammar that governs life on Earth. We can abstract away further to ask, what is language? And then the next question, really, I suppose, that arises when you think about human languages, how did we get it? Does it also spring from our genetic makeup? Or is it a construct that is the result of something else?
Each species has its own specific form of communication, and with this communication system, they can delineate the world around them.
Okay, kids. This is a male fiddler crab. What do you think he does with this large claw?
Well, he waves it and tries to attract females.
That's a good form of communication, isn't it?
All animals communicate in some form or another. To have things to say to each other, whether by sound or sight or smell or some other means of communicating. Moths communicate by color and odor, and male moths can detect female moths over miles very often when the female moth is giving off a very powerful scent. Other animals communicate, like these elephants, by sound so low in frequency that we don't usually hear them ourselves. You're all very, very beautiful. Yes, you are.
The essential properties of human language are not shared by other communication systems. Rather, the elements of the communication systems are signals, really, keyed to particular needs, wants, or whatever.
Signals surely existed before language.
Prices are communicated away from your face. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is the symbol for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 contracts.
A sophisticated form of an inherited animal system.
It is not possible in other communication systems to form a new thought and to express it by putting together elements of the communication system.
Quick thoughts, but not new ones.
If language is so beautifully subtle and expressive, why do we continue to use these more primitive, peripheral, non-linguistic means of communication? For a very simple reason. Because they're efficient. They're quick.
Hello. I haven't done anything yet, and all of a sudden, I hit the brill of my cap. I've hit the key or the indicator. Now I want to give the hit and run. 1, 2, 3.
He will indicate which cradle he wants to use by touching his head or by touching his elbow.
We played an entire season one time, and we had all these signs. And then nobody could ever get them, except our team. They were very simple. As you remember, I said when I clap, that ends the signs, sequence of signs. But what we did, we would give the signs, and we would clap. One was a take. We'd give the sign. We clap twice. That was the bunt. We'd give the sign. That was a hit and run. It was the claps all the time. Nobody was watching the claps. They were all watching the signs.
You secure everything, and the most important signal is this, and it means he goes to lunch. So long.
But it's very doubtful that even the elementary capacity for referring to something, and possibly even the capacity to point to things, and even those elementary capacities have not been demonstrated to be available in other organisms.
Dogs don't care where the finger is pointing.
The traffic policeman on the corner can make the automobile drivers understand what he intends them to do, but the number of things he can make them understand is obviously very limited.
A baseball coach can tell you to steal second base, but he can't order a pizza with his signaling systems. He can't talk about the past. He can't change his mind.
But the number of ways in which we talk without words is astonishing. Nonverbal communication is the special province of sociolinguists, like Deborah Tannen.
This is my laboratory. As a sociolinguist, I want to know how people use language in their everyday lives. Some people point out that in communication, if you're facing somebody, the nonverbal can account for as much as 90% about what's being communicated. In other words, people are getting impressions from a lot of things other than the words that you use. We're communicating by the way we dress, the way we stand, the way we style our hair. I'm looking for you. You said it, you will. The way we walk. I'm interested in how language is used in social interaction, not like studying grammar or the history of language. It's everything about how you say what you mean. And one study that I did was how women and men, when they talk to each other, how they stand. What I noticed about the way these two men were talking is how they're not facing each other head on. What they're What they're doing is kind of standing side by side looking at the world. And that's exactly what I found in my research. Boys and men look at each other, but it's sideways. But if you see women talking, they're usually like this, facing directly. And it isn't the meaning of the words that's primary. It's everything about conversational style, how we say what we mean. Even how much space you leave between yourself and the person you're talking to is significant in conversations.
28. But they're all.
If you're talking to someone who's trying to stand a little bit closer that is comfortable to you, you think they're pushy and overbearing. If you talk to someone who's trying to stand a little farther than you think is normal, then you think they're standoffish. And if you watch two people, one of whom is comfortable standing a little bit more closely than the other one, that person keeps trying to move in. That makes the other person uncomfortable, and he tries to move out. And they will chase each other down the hall in that way until someone gets pinned to the wall. All the organs that we use for speaking have other functions, too.
My mother always told me not to talk with food in my mouth.
Our hands, at the same time that they gesture, we also use them to hold something. And yet somehow we're able to separate that speech function from all the other functions and understand what people are saying, even though they're doing things with their mouths and their hands at the same time.
We seem to be extremely good at deciding which motions that a person makes are communicative, nods and this sort of thing, and which other ones are just ancillary gestures that don't mean anything at all as far as communication is concerned. We distinguish the message from everything else that's happening in the situation.
Some gestures seem to be universal, and others seem to be specific to a culture, area, or a language. For example, in Tlingit, the Indian language of Alaska that I work with, to say, "Come here," you go, "Hagu, hagu." And you can compare that with our English, "Come here," or with Japanese, "Kite kudasai."
Once language evolved, there was really no reason to stop using the older methods. They have persisted, so that today we have language mixed up with all of these inherited ways of communicating, some of which we don't even know we're doing.
Visual metaphors. The gesture system is analogical and perfectly synchronized with speech, which is digital.
If you think of a simple mechanical event like a spinning top, to describe it in speech, we have to break this into its words and separate them into a linear string. The top is spinning.
The top is spinning.
But a gesture can show this event as a single instantaneous movement, and that's what is true, we think, of the primitive form of the sentence. It's instantaneous thought.
Everybody gestures, some more, some less. David McNeil studies gestures on videotape to understand the special role they play.
The drain pipe was Valentine's Eve when I really, I felt that he was doing something.
A gesture is speech in its most primitive form.
No, I was still at home. I was in my home.
What language does is take instantaneous thought and make it linear, words after words. What gestures do is show the instantaneous thought itself.
My husband was not there.
He wasn't home.
He wasn't home at Valentine's Eve, which for the 14 years we had spent Valentine's Eve together. I beeped him and I asked him, would he please come home? He told me, he said, come home for what? I said, well, aren't you going to be here for Valentine's Eve? And then I started trying to find out where my sister was, okay? They said Michelle went somewhere for the weekend and she had a lot of money and she was giving people money to keep her kids, okay? So I started putting two and two together. I said they're together. I didn't want to think this. I didn't want to think, it was devastating for me to think, I didn't want to think this at all.
Right.
So I beeped him on the beeper, using my telephone.
Your husband?
My husband.
People who don't gesture make their sentences more elaborate, more complex than people who do gesture. So it seems to be an exchange of complexity from gesture into speech.
The guy she was living with, and he helped.
She was involved with someone too.
Yeah, she was living with someone. See, she had someone, and then I had my husband, and my husband told her to leave this man for him.
Right.
Now let's look at this one more time. And she had someone, and then I had my husband. She puts one person, her antagonist, out here in this part of space, and she puts the other person, namely her own self, at her own location in space. Now, she's going to withdraw her hand from this space, so she's leaving the antagonist space, and as she crosses this frontier over to her own space, you will see a little flutter in her hands. The meaning is changing, and she lifts up her hand, and there's a little flutter, a wave of the hand, before it goes back and it moves into the other space. At the same time, she says, and then. That's a linguistic way of marking the same kind of boundary. Here's the flutter, and now she moves into herself. And I had my husband. She touches herself at the conclusion. This woman was such a good storyteller precisely because she was so economical in speech. At the same time, she was elaborate in her gesture, and she was using them in a beautifully coordinated kind of multimedia display, both visual and speech.
I called him an axe. Yeah, I want to die. Literally want to die. But I don't want to die anymore, not for them. I'm going to live, write this book, and make me $1 million.
And that's the end of that.
We have to guard against the assumption that evolution has some purpose in mind and is trying to achieve progress. The physical world works the way it works, and evolution is, as many biologists describe it, a tinkerer. Takes the tools that are available, and they're the ones that get used. And then other things happen.
We argue endlessly about how evolution occurred, but the fact that it occurred is as well established as anything we know in science. Certainly as well documented as the fact that the Earth revolves around the sun.
Faces play a different role.
The primary signal system for emotion is the face. It certainly isn't the words. You can show on your face the feelings you're having, which you may be trying to put into words. Share. Or not putting into words. Facial expressions can occur without any words whatsoever.
Now, what is the most important thing in the face? Start with any face. We'll do this. Nose, eyes. Now, expressionless, as it is right now. Let's see.
Cartoonist Pat Oliphant.
More language. Anger. Hunched anger. What do we concentrate on with expression? Some people say it's the eyes, some people say it's the mouth. I think it's a combination of everything, and if you can mix hands in with it, that's all the better. 3 drinks later. Same mouth, different language. Disappointed. Cupping his hands, head in his hands. Let's try a smile. He's heard something that pleases him about somebody he doesn't like. His mouth, definitely. Much gentler expression.
A 1-2. Now pull in the 4. Keep the 1-2 up. A little more 2. That's good. Now open the 5 wide. we developed something we call a facial action coding system. It's basically like a musical notation system, but for the face. It allows you to dissect, without taking off the skin, any expression and reduce it to the muscles that produce the expression. A little more 5. A little more 4. That's very good. That's a fear expression. Using this, we learned the answer to such questions as how many different expressions can a human being make? More than 10,000. How many of those have anything to do with emotion? 2,000 to 3,000.
A face in the crowd after the hated dictator of Romania, Ceausescu, was executed. Faces can say more than one thing at a time.
When people I meet learn that I study facial expression, their usual response is to say, "Oh, you can read my mind," and they'll often blush. And I try to tell them, I cannot read your mind. The face does not tell us what you're thinking. It only tells us how you feel about what you're thinking. I can read your feelings, but not your mind. If I want to read what you're saying, I have to read your lips. If I want to read your emotions, I have to read your total expression on your face. So maybe about a 12B, 12B, 25. The smile is the easiest expression to recognize. It's a very loud, clear, universal expression. Very hard to do. I mean, one of the interesting things about a really genuine happy is you can't do it deliberately. Okay, now you do it. Now you break down into a real pleasure response, but if you try and do it deliberately, you can't. In the true enjoyment smile, the eye muscle and the lip muscle occur together. Now, in the polite smile, the eye muscle isn't part of it. It's just in the lips. Is that so? Thanks a lot. Really enjoyed that. That was a great party. If you look at the brain activity, you find a distinctive pattern that's associated with positive emotions in the smile that involves both the lips and the eyes. So there's a very wide variety of evidence to show that this is a very robust distinction. I set out to try to demonstrate that facial expressions were very specific to each culture. That an expression would mean one thing in one culture and a totally different thing in another culture. I was completely anti-evolutionary in my viewpoint, but my evidence showed me just the opposite. I needed to find a people who were visually isolated. Otherwise, I mean, when I found comparability in expressions between, let's say, Japanese and Americans, you could always claim that that was not due to their evolutionary heritage. It was because they were all watching John Wayne on the tube.
So Ekman went to New Guinea in 1967. At that time, the people were truly isolated.
The evidence of universality, of the same expressions signifying the same emotions in every culture that's been studied, shows to us that Darwin was correct in his theory that these expressions are innate, they're not learned, they are part of our evolutionary heritage, as I believe is our entire emotion system. Doing the work to map out exactly what the repertoire of expressions are, which ones serve a linguistic function, which ones show emotion. No one had really ever asked these questions before or answered them, and it took me about 15 years. There are 6 or perhaps 7 emotions that have a universal expression. Enjoyment, anger, fear, sadness, disgust, surprise, perhaps contempt as well. For each of these emotions, there's a small set of expressions that are the same for all people, all over the world.
Darwin's argument is these universal gestures could only have been functional in a previous mode of living that might have characterized not only the human past, but a more distant animal past, but couldn't possibly have that same meaning today. For example, we get very angry, we snarl, we go like this, and we raise our lips in order to expose our canine teeth. which many of our ancestral kinds of creatures do, and they have big canines, and it makes sense. But we don't have big canines, so this can only be the retention of what was once an adaptive feature. Likewise, Darwin says when we get startled, we go like this. We rear back our hands to be ready to respond. We open our eyes as wide as we can. We open our mouth and breathe in so we can get signals of odor as well. Now, most dangers to which we're exposed today don't really require adaptively that kind of response. It's an old inherited reaction.
You can tell whether someone's thinking from their face, but you can't tell what it is they're thinking. You may be able to tell how they feel about what they're thinking, but not the content of the thought.
There's no way in body language that you can convey exactly 27 minutes and 13 seconds after 4 o'clock. For those things, you've got to have words.
Honorificabilitudinitatis. We could gesture, roll over. But how are you going to gesture? I'd like you to roll over tomorrow. My dog rolled over yesterday. I'm imagining rolling over. A limitless number of ways that you could modulate that idea can be expressed verbally and really can't be expressed non-verbally. You can't even state a simple fact in gesture, like, I had eggs for breakfast.
What biological event could have created this? Well, the biological event was the creation of grammar.
Syntax, this extraordinary ability that we display in language to create an infinite number of sentences.
It's my birthday.
The ability to say in one moment, eat me, and a moment later to say me eat.
Negative statements can only be made in terms of language. You can say that something will not take place, something is not going on, something did not happen.
There's not a giraffe standing beside me.
And to put it in another way, as Bertrand Russell once said, however eloquently your dog may bark, he can't tell you that his father was poor but honest.
The biological event that must have happened to create speech was somehow the linking of sound and meaning. But think about it. No two things are more different from each other than sound and meaning. A lot of animals can make sounds, but no animals, except in the most rudimentary way, can relate sound and meaning.
One might ask why nature chose sound as the vehicle for linguistic communication.
What kind of bus truck? Get back down that hill! Hurry up! Get over there, hurry up!
There are, after all, only about 20,000 nerve fibers that connect the ear to the brain.
Let's go, Bob, let's go!
The meaning can be perfectly clear. Words alone may not be.
Tap on 3.
Often, our eyes would seem more useful than our ears.
The ear, after all, is a much poorer organ than the eye. The ear is a narrower and shallower channel.
Signing requires that we look at each other.
If we don't look at each other, we can't understand each other. Hi.
We can talk around corners. Groups can chat in the dark. Speech leaves our hands free to do other important things.
pretty amazing. Requires a lot of coordination. Almost as much coordination as you need to speak a human language. What's going on inside your mouth every time you talk requires at least as much coordination as that.
Well, speech production is sort of like a three-ring circus. You think of people doing complicated things like walking tightropes or balancing on tops of elephants or horses. Speech is probably more complicated than that. Your tongue is moving up, forward, back, down. At the same time, there's a flap in the back of your mouth which is moving up and down to close your nose off.
There's very subtle, small movements are being executed with great skill and with great speed.
If you looked at an X-ray movie of your mouth, you'd be amazed.
This dynamic process of speech articulation.
A very elaborate ballet is being performed. So who executes this dance? Well, there are 6 dancers. The lips, the 3 different parts of the tongue, the soft palate, and the larynx.
Your lips go in and out, and the size of the hole of your mouth has to be adjusted precisely to produce any vowel or consonant.
Each of these 6 dancers is capable of performing, say, 4 different dances. If one dancer alone is active, well, then there'll be 4 different dances that you can choose from. If 2 of them are active, well, there'll be 4 times 4 different dances. And 6 dancers are capable of performing 4 to the 6th. If each dance were a sound, then the total repertory is of the order of, say, some 4,000. So that we come equipped into this world with some little subset of the universal possibilities which were given to us by the fact that we were born human.
Everyone that I know says the same words, pronounces them the same way.
All the words that have ever been spoken by all the people who have ever lived have been formed out of a couple dozen of these curious linguistic objects we know as consonants and vowels.
Katie does. Apple in the tea.
A syllable is composed of a consonant-like element.
B, D, G.
A vowel-like element.
The vowel carries the sound. It can be sung, it can be shouted, it can be sustained.
Now, without vowels, it's impossible to speak. And when people are shouting out from the hill down into the valley, it's the vowels that carry a really heavy load there.
Any of us can make 50 possible vowels if we have been brought up in the right kind of place to do it. I can say vowels like E, 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 A, O. I can go on doing this. U, U, E, E. I mean, take a language like Swedish. Swedish has all sorts of different vowels. Nevertheless, it turns out that the languages of the world as a whole tend to use 5 vowels as the most common vowels. In fact, 1 language in 5, roughly, of the languages in the world uses just the same vowels as, say, Spanish.
The vowels?
E, E, A, O, U.
Oh, A, E, I, O, U.
A, bird.
Bird.
One of the rarest vowels in the languages of the world is the vowels that Americans have in a word like bird, if you'll pardon my saying it as bird.
Bird?
I, of course, think the word should properly be pronounced as bird.
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 Because this is a very rare vowel. It occurs in less than 1% of all the languages of the world.
Bird.
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 Consonants are ways of turning the vowels on and off.
If you say a vowel like ah, it's open. A consonant like but, it's closed.
The epitome of patatities.
We go from closed stage to open stage, closed stage to open stage, and there's this alternation of closing and opening, which underlies all speech in all languages.
The
ability to do this is unique to language and to human beings.
Some languages alternate less than others.
Czech has all kinds of consonantal groupings which are impossible in English. For example, a name for ostrich in Czech is pštros, that has 4 consonants at the beginning.
An example from English would be the plural of the fraction sixths. So we say
3/6, 4/6.
So we have 4 consonants in a row.
And 5/6.
4/6, 5/6. I've had dental work today, so this area is numb.
Pštros.
These are squeals being produced by a baby. During the first 6 months of life, babies produce a lot of sounds like these.
They're practicing the extreme outputs of their vocal periphery.
Mum. Can you say good morning?
We have these little sounds that they produce in the first month or so of life. And then we have gooing. And then we have a whole variety of sounds that occur during the period from, say, 4 to 6 months of age. Things like and
We've learned that these sound types have unique importance for infants. They turn out to be the building blocks upon which infants build mature sounds of the world's languages.
these sounds produced with quick syllable articulation, quick consonant vowel articulation, are required if the child is going to be able to live up to the requirements of talking. The baby isn't really talking yet. What babies do produce are a small core set of universal syllable types that occur in all the world's languages that babies all over the world seem to prefer.
Producing consonants and vowels and perceiving them is an aspect of our biology, a very fundamental aspect of our biology.
If you don't produce syllables, you're not talking a natural language.
Consonants and vowels are made for each other in the sense that they can be co-articulated.
Co-articulation, the effect of a preceding sound on a following sound, is an extremely important aspect of human language and enables us to go much more rapidly than we could otherwise.
Live, love.
So I don't say b-a, I say ba, a single piece of sound that contains both the consonant and the vowel.
Your mouth gets ready in anticipation so that even before it forms the first consonant, k or l, it knows what the vowel is going to be following it. Cool, kill. And so you get a different k and a different l, depending on what's going to follow it.
Here's the first one coming up.
Why are you weary? Why are you weary?
The vowel is being spoken at the same time that the consonant is being spoken, or at least the gestures appropriate to these two events are being grossly overlapped.
It's a word!
That's called co-articulation, and that's the heart of the speech code.
The primary advantage of human speech is its speed.
The slow talkers of America.
You can imagine that through the history of humanity, speed of communication has been a major factor in our survival.
We can easily go at rates as high as 200 or 300 words a minute.
Here in New York City, right? In New York.
People can understand it at rates as high as 500 words a minute.
Dr. Weather, how about those Yankees? I just got the proposal. I think the perfect way to proceed at this point, 10:30 a.m., would be for me to have my system duplicated, collated, translated, telegraphed, reciprocated, reiterated, and expurgated. Then I think with all due haste, my system should tabulate it, word process it, index it, file it, cross-reference it, computerize it, and make sure that every man, woman, and child in the United States gets a copy.
To do this whole process, you also need a brain that can control all these complicated maneuvers. And it seemed probably evolved in concert with the vocal tract, because if you look at a chimpanzee, you find that the chimpanzee cannot produce any of these maneuvers for speech production.
A very meager vocalization repertoire can be developed, and its utilization as speech has been a sore failure.
No way. They just don't have the brain mechanisms to control this vocal apparatus.
Well, we know that language is biological because there's parts of the brain that humans have that serve no function than to allow human language to take place.
The two sides of the brain are specialized differently. The left hemisphere primarily for language processing, while the right hemisphere has its own set of specializations for visual spatial processing. It seems that the left hemisphere, for example, has an innate predisposition to language. Whatever the form that language takes.
The important thing is that language is not mouth stuff, it's brain stuff. The larynx is sometimes called the Adam's apple. It's this little thing that sticks out here and goes up and down as you swallow.
The larynx has the vocal cords, and they're very complicated structures of muscles and ligaments. And though they're complex, what they do for speech is pretty simple. What they do is this.
Like musical reeds.
And that's what the vocal cords do. They open and close, producing puffs of air, only much faster. They convert the steady flow of air from the lungs, which you cannot hear, into very, very, very loud sources of energy. And that's why animals have larynxes, because it gives you the ability to make loud sounds efficiently for communication. One of the most important things in the evolution of modern human beings is the descent of the larynx down to here. It went from up here in early hominids, early human-like animals, down way, 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 way down to here. If you have this kind of arrangement that fossils in Neanderthal had, with your larynx right up against the nose, you can't make the sounds that this guy could make, like e's and oohs and cuz and guz, that are inherently more distinct. E and oo are the sounds that only humans can make. Hi, bye. Say hi, something of this sort has a vowel E.
Hi, bye. Hi, bye.
I do.
Place the ring on her finger, Michael.
The descent of the larynx is not without great cost, so it must have been very important from an evolutionary point of view that the vocal tract have a larger space. Because for the first time, when the larynx descends, the young infant faces the possibility of choking on food.
The vocal tract of a human infant is a little like that of a chimpanzee in the sense that the larynx is very high. The descent of the larynx occurs between months 2, 3, 4 of the first year of life.
The very young infant can breathe and swallow at the same time. Once the larynx descends, this is no longer possible.
In all other animals, food goes in one way down to the stomach, and air goes in another way, and the paths don't cross.
Find a belly button with my other hand, make a fist. Now I'm going to pull up towards her chin 6 to 8 times. 1 and 2.
So with one common path for food and air down to the larynx allows us to speak, but it also causes a serious problem.
1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and out it comes. Okay?
It lets food lodge in our larynx if we aren't really careful as we swallow. And once this happens, you choke to death.
You're going to choke for me? Give me the international sign for choking. All right. What's the first thing you'd say to him? You're choking? Good. All right. So you come in and you stand behind him, one foot in front of the other. All right. Let's go.
We're the only animals on Earth that need to do a Heimlich maneuver to avoid death.
6 to 8 times. 1 and 2, 3. Out it comes. Great.
Why would you take a risk like that? The only reason I can imagine is that it gave you an enormous advantage over the other species that you were competing with to be able to make this wider variety of sounds.
There are literally thousands of possible different speech sounds. Of those thousands, several hundred have been observed in the languages of the world.
And it is the same group everywhere you go.
But the average language only uses about 40 different sounds or something of that order.
Each language picks a few sounds from the same small group of hundreds out of a possibility of thousands. Even a strange-sounding language like Eskimo only seems more different than it really is.
Tawad suko apuris kanang ama nakan apasok suko yugom li suko ayok katawad.
There are some sounds that we make in which air comes out through the nose.
Ma.
Huh.
Ma.
Some of those sounds are actually in other languages, such as Welsh. Welsh has the sound which Eskimo has, and Russian has as well. So really, there aren't that many sounds which Eskimo does have that are totally unusual or foreign.
Why, if there are all those different possible sounds, why do some of them never occur? Let's think of some of the things that never occur. For example, something that most people can do is you can whistle. You can go, but no language goes, e, ah, oo. That just sort of doesn't occur as a possible language sound. There are lots of other things like that. I mean, most of us can go, blah, 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 blah. Again, that doesn't occur in languages. You can make all sorts of curious noises that don't occur. They just don't happen.
This certainly suggests that language was not invented by human beings. Rather, it evolved with the evolution of our species.
You could just as well make a sound in a human language by doing this, a bottom teeth to the upper lip, as doing it the other way around as we do with F and V. No human language does that. It's just as easy to do. There's no logical reason not to do it, but it absolutely never happens. And it's hard to understand how that could be true if it were not something hardwired in the human brain.
The raspberry.
These raspberry sounds, they are very rare in languages, and yet almost every baby that we have ever studied in a longitudinal fashion, meaning month after month, at some point in time, not only produces some of those raspberries, but does it systematically and repetitively.
And often with cereal in their mouth.
Unusual sounds do show up in some languages.
In my language, which is Xhosa, we have 3 click sounds.
And every baby can make them.
Or when you get really upset, you say.
Numbers of African languages use clicks.
This is my friend Mazisi, who's a Zulu poet, and we're just trying to find out about the different click sounds. Can you give me a poem or something where you actually said those kind of sounds?
Ngake ngambona ungqongqoshe engiqabula kuzo zonke izihlathi ngabe sengazi ukuba ngiyomcabanga njalo njalo. It just means I saw a great man who kissed me in all my 1,000 cheeks, and I knew then that I'll know him forever and ever.
What made all this possible? Everything we call civilization. How did language begin? Nobody knows. An Australian town. Yet another version of the mysterious human language.
Language is itself a living, independent kind of creature. It certainly wasn't made in the first place by any committee. It certainly is not governed by the scholars or by the academies or by anybody in any kind of government. It evolves and changes all by itself. And nobody really has a good explanation for what lies behind those changes.
The real problem with the evolution of language is that we so often get caught in the adaptationist bias of the strict form of Darwinism, which claims that anything as important as language has to arise slowly and gradually, step by step, each step as an adaptive solution to an immediate environmental circumstance, each in continuity one with the next. And it's hard to imagine language evolving that way. Language is such a all or none phenomenon in humans. It has such a quirky and apparently universal structure.
Well, it's almost unimaginable that humans invented language, any more than humans invented their circulatory system.
Maybe it was the event that created the human species.
It is the simplest hypothesis to say language evolved only once, and all languages today are descendants of this one proto-language.
There's some speculation that there was one Eve about 200,000 years ago from whom all existing humans derived, and that some set of mutations or whatever had taken place at about that time that led to the original language of which all the existing languages are variations. That's possible, but it's by no means necessary.
The brain evolves for some cognitive benefit of larger size, and it may be a very complex set of cognitive benefits, but it probably wasn't language. And then by virtue of its size, is capable of doing all sorts of things that have nothing to do with the original reason for the increase.
It could have been that when the brain reached a certain level of complexity, it simply automatically had certain properties, because that's what happens when you pack 10 to the 10th neurons into something the size of a basketball under the particular conditions of human physiology that had then been reached.
My own estimate is that language, human languages of the sort that we would recognize, are probably 100,000 years old. And the brain continued to evolve after these linguistic events began to take place, so that they are a part of the brain, and the human brain would simply not function properly without those components.
That there could have been multiple sources of language, and nevertheless they would still look very much alike because they're all being created by the same minds.
Ngake ngambona ungqongqoshe engiqawula kuzo zonke izihlathi ezinkulungwane. Ngabe sengimcabanga, ngabe sengimfihla engqondweni, ngabe sengazi ngiyakumphupha njalo njalo, ngimphuphe buya ngimphuphe hamba ngimphuphe nasekugcineni kokugcina.
The Human Language Series was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Science Foundation, the Annenberg Foundation, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, annual financial support from viewers like you, the National Institute of Mental Health, the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, and these additional funders.
This is PBS.